obtained by The Blast show that Marielle Minuti filed for a domestic violence order in Los Angeles. That's where Avenatti was arrested last week. Now, it's unclear if Minuti is the same woman who accused him of the domestic violence. Avenatti responding on Twitter in part, quote, "I've never abused a woman or committed domestic violence against anyone. Any claim to the contrary is completely bogus and fabricated." Ivanka Trump's lawyer slamming a report that she used her private email for government business. The Washington Post claims the White House advisor may have violated federal rules by using her personal account to communicate with White House or cabinet officials. A spokesperson for Trump's lawyer tells Fox News that, quote, "There was never classified information transmitted. The account was never transferred or housed at Trump Organization. No emails were ever deleted." And they also say that Ivanka reviewed her email practices and explained the issue to congressional leaders 14 months ago. Well, the White House has some new rules for the press after the dispute involving CNN's Jim Acosta. Journalists will now be allowed one question each and will only be given a follow-up at the discretion of the official. The White House also dropping efforts to revoke Acosta's press pass. CNN says that its lawsuit against the administration is no longer necessary. And it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas at the White House. President Trump and First Lady Melania receiving their official Christmas tree delivered by a horse-drawn carriage. The nearly 20-foot-tall Fraser fir, handpicked from a farm in North Carolina. It will be decorated at and displayed in the Blue Room. They filed this lawsuit on Monday in federal court. What do you expect, if anything, to come of this?
Well, this lawsuit is based on a provision of the Constitution that requires cabinet members and other top government officials to get confirmed by the United States Senate. And while both sides of this controversy are making some legitimate arguments, I think that President Trump here has the benefit and the advantage of saying that his position, supported by Supreme Court precedent, acts of Congress spanning 3 decades, dating back to 1792, and at least hundreds of instances where presidents have made similar appointments in the past.
And here's what actually, as you mentioned that, we can say what the Justice Department said. Here's their statement. They said there are over 160 instances in American history in which non-Senate confirmed persons performed on a temporary basis the duties of a Senate confirmed position. To suggest otherwise is to ignore centuries of practice and precedent. And that's what you were just saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually 160 cases, and that was until 1860. So even since 1860, we've seen many more examples, even than that first 160.
And you also said that it comes down to, what, a 2-word phrase in the Constitution, principal officer.
Yeah, and, you know, there's a lot of noise surrounding this appointment of Whitaker because of the Mueller probe, but the legal question in this case is really quite simple. It comes down to the meaning of principal officer and whether an acting attorney general is considered a principal officer under the Constitution. There's no doubt that whoever Trump nominates to serve as the attorney general for the remainder of his term, they'll be a principal officer that requires Senate confirmation. But that doesn't necessarily apply to an acting attorney general who's appointed temporarily and is going to serve no more than 210 days.
Now, there have been some challenges to his authority as special counsel. So Robert Mueller, he took some pains to issue this statement. He said that the president, he actually issued this statement saying that the president's designation of acting attorney general Matthew G. Whitaker on November 7th has no effect on this case whatsoever.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, at the end of the day, Robert Mueller's authority as a special counsel is based on one set of laws. President Trump's authority to appoint Matthew Whitaker as acting attorney general is based on another set of laws. And even though we like to conflate the two and how they may interact with each other on facts, it all comes down to it's based off different laws, and the courts will be looking at these lawsuits very differently differently and through different lenses.
Now, something that, and we have to wrap up, but something that you said, you don't expect this to go all the way to the Supreme Court, but you said it would be interesting for people to see if it did, because you would expect this would not necessarily break the way people would expect it to.
Yeah, I think that it splits, in favor of Trump based off of precedent, but I actually don't think it splits along ideological lines. I would actually expect that liberal justices Sotomayor and Ginsburg could be leading the contingent of justices that rule in favor of Donald Trump, whereas a conservative justice like Clarence Thomas could be leading the contingent of justices that rule against Donald Trump. So that could be pretty interesting to see.
Interesting. All right, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Well, the time now is about 18 minutes after the top of the hour, and she bombed at this year's White House Correspondents' Dinner, and now comedian Michelle Wolf is blasting the big changes just announced for next year's event.
John at some point is going to want to move on. John will move on.
So 2020 is no longer written in stone.
It could happen. Yeah, it could be.
Plus, President Trump open to changes within his cabinet. Now the focus shifting to 2020. Why our next guest, a presidential historian, says that John Kelly doesn't have the experience to help the president get reelected. Who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 little girls will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Chris Watts' heartbroken in-laws speaking out as his sentencing.
You disgust me. You monster. Thought you would get away with this.
I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives. But I know God and his mighty angels were there at that moment to bring them home to paradise.
Well, prosecutors say Watts strangled his wife and suffocated his daughters to escape his marriage and start a new life with his girlfriend. Authorities say that he was having an affair and contacted a realtor about selling his house 1 day after the murders. The family of legendary DJ Casey Kasem accusing each other of killing him.
I love that man so much. I would have died for him.
Jean killed my father. What she did led to his death.
The bitter battle between Kasem's second wife and his grown children from a previous marriage laid out in this week's 48 Hours. Kasem died on Father's Day back in 2014 from a Parkinson's-like disease. Police are opening a new investigation, though, into his death. Well, President Trump is hinting at some big changes within his cabinet, which could begin with his chief of staff, John Kelly.
John at some point is going to want to move on. John will move on.
So 2020 is no longer written in stone.
It could happen. Yeah, it could be. I have 3 or 4 or 5 positions that I'm thinking about. Of that, maybe it's going to end up being 2, maybe. But I need flexibility.
So how would these potential changes impact the direction of the administration? Presidential historian Jane Hampton Cook joins me now to talk a little bit more about this. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
So as we begin our discussion this morning, let's bring up a list of some of the cabinet officials who have left the administration so far. You heard the president speaking right there. He said, he's considering some changes and he needs some flexibility. Now, this isn't all too unusual for an administration, correct?
No, not at all. It's very common for senior level positions, junior level positions to change frequently throughout a presidency. I think President Obama had 5 chiefs of staff. Reagan had 4. So it's not uncommon for things to shift. And the reason is the seasons change in a presidency. And so the job descriptions change. What you needed at the beginning of your presidency is not what you need after a midterm election where the House is controlled by the opposite political party. So it's not that President Trump is unhappy with General Kelly is that he brought General Kelly in to establish order and routine. He still needs that skill, but he now needs someone who also can help prepare him for 2020 and the presidential election, and who can do battle or work with the new House of Representatives.
And one of the possible replacements for John Kelly, who has been mentioned, is Mike Pence's chief of staff, Nick Ayers. Would that be someone who could take that role?
You know, it certainly could be. And, you know, I could also see a scenario where maybe President Trump, maybe John Kelly stays for a while and he brings in someone else, a new deputy, to take on some of those other needs that he has. And so when we saw President Trump do this during the campaign, he needed Corey Lewandowski, who knew New Hampshire, to help him win the primaries. But he didn't need Corey to deal with the Republican convention. He needed the experience of Paul Manafort. But he didn't need Paul Manafort for the general election. He needed Kellyanne Conway. And so some people thought that was chaotic, but I think it was really strategic on the part of President Trump. What skills do I need for my staff for this next phase? And so that the phases are changing. It doesn't mean that he's unhappy necessarily with people. I think we got to make that distinction.
You already mentioned some of the changes in comparison to the Obama administration. You yourself worked during the Bush administration, and you mentioned that early on you were told that about 18 months is the average to serve.
That's right. When I was a White House staffer at the very beginning of the George W. Bush administration, Chief of Staff Andy Card told all of the staff, look, the average tenure for a White House staffer is 18 months. And the reason for that is that the intensity and the pressure. 1 year working in the White House is like 3 years working somewhere else in terms of pace and intensity and sacrifice. And so that's why there's turnover, is because it's difficult. You know, and even George Washington had turnover. He had Thomas Jefferson, and when Jefferson left, the Secretary of State, everyone thought it was a little bit controversial because he disagreed with the president. But in fact, Washington and Jefferson had been talking about Jefferson's resignation for 6 months. And so it was no real big deal internally, but it sort of seemed that way, I think, to the public.
Love it when I learn something new every morning. Jane, thank you so much for the historical perspective.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day. Well, the time now is almost half past the top of the hour, and a school prayer takes a horrifying turn as students are wheeled out on stretchers, some even suffering seizures. So what could be behind this sudden mystery illness? We'll tell you. And Democrats finally admitting defeat in the hotly contested races in Florida and Georgia. But if rejecting results is the new norm, then why even vote? We'll debate it up next. Defeat in the hotly contested Georgia governor race, but not without smearing the results.
But will I say that this election was not tainted, was not a disinvestment and a disenfranchisement of thousands of voters? I will not say that.
If Stacey Abrams doesn't win in Georgia, they stole it. It's clear.
If she'd had a fair election, she already would have won.
But if rejecting results is the new norm, then why even vote? Joining me now, Republican strategist Kimberly Klacik and Democratic strategist Antoine Seawright. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Heather.
Good morning.
Kimberly, I'll start with you. Is this the new norm, and is it dangerous?
Well, their motto used to be, when they go low, we go high. Now it's, if they win, we cry. If the Democrats were determined to make a mockery of our democracy, they have succeeded. For example, in Florida, not one vote that was found went in favor of Governor Rick Scott. So now, is that a coincidence? No, we know that's not a coincidence. According to Democrats, if they do not win, there's either voter suppression or votes were lost. But I want people to understand the major takeaway here. What we learned, thanks to election supervisor Brenda Snipes, that a commissioner or supervisor could swing a recount their way if they choose to, because they don't have to get the votes in by a deadline. Those votes are no longer valid. So our electoral system is vulnerable, and we should keep that in mind.
And what about that, Antoine? She missed the deadline by 2 minutes.
You know, there's no such thing as a perfect election in this country, Heather. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, independent thinker. What I think Democrats wanted through this entire process was a fair election process. It was political malpractice what took place in Georgia, from the removing people off the voting rolls.
What about Florida? Before we go to Georgia, what about Florida? I mean, that's her job. I mean, and voters depend on her doing her job correctly.
Heather, I will tell you what I said to someone else on another program on this network. Florida did what Florida always does, and that is make America wait again. It's unfortunate. I think we have to figure out what is the root of the problem, why we consistently have these problems in Florida, because Florida has consistently been the state that we have to wait election after election. And I don't think you can pinpoint that on one particular person. I know it's easy to do so by Republicans and those who are just anti having a fair election, but you can't pinpoint it on one particular person.
Okay, that's fair. Now you can talk about Georgia.
I want to talk about Georgia because I think Georgia highlighted the hypocrisy in the Republican Party. Look, that was voter suppression 101, from the registration problem, from the machine problem, to the not counting votes problem. Look, it's not hard to just have a free and fair election. The vote is the most sacred thing we have in our democracy, and I think Democrats and Republicans must do everything we can to make sure that happens.
Kimberly, I think Republicans are doing a really bad job of voter suppression when you have voters turning out in record numbers.
Right, exactly. How do you explain that, Antoine? I don't think
that
you
doesn't
can.
mean anything, though. That doesn't mean just because they turn out in record numbers does not mean thousands of voters were not suppressed on the rolls. That is non-debatable.
The same song by Democrats. There's voter suppression when they don't win. When they win, we don't hear about voter suppression.
That's not true, Kim.
That is true. If we're not going to accept the results of an election, if we're going to dig up individuals we may or may not have partied with in high school instead of going on our proven track record, if we're going to allow everyone to migrate here illegally, then we are no longer the country that we have grown to love. And those, if you want to talk about Georgia and Stacey Abrams, those that refuse to concede, those people are simply un-American, in my opinion, because we are supposed to honor our elections.
Kim, you can't call her un-American because she saw what the rest of us saw, and that was voter suppression. Look, if you can show me how what Brian Kemp did in Georgia was American, then I will take you out to dinner.
Antoine, I think you should take her out to dinner anyway. Antoine, what about accepting the results now that it's over and done with, and that he is now the governor of Georgia, and accepting that fact and working with him moving forward for the people of Georgia?
Listen, I'm all about accepting what has happened, but I do not think we can ignore what happened during this entire process, from not having enough machines, from poll worker issues, to rejecting ballots because of signatures. Simple things that he knew what would impact this election because the stakes were so high in the state of Georgia. Thousands of voters were pretty much disenfranchised because of the Republican suppression efforts.
All right. Well, we have to move on. Thank you both for joining us. Kimberly, Antoine, let us know if you go to dinner.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Well, the time now is about 20 minutes until the top of the hour, and she bombed at the last White House Correspondents' Dinner.
I actually really like Sarah. She burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye.
Was awful. Why disgraced comedian Michelle Wolf still can't lay off the insults after a change to next year's lineup. We'll tell you about it. And peas or carrots, 2 turkeys up for a presidential pardon, and you get to decide. Carly Shimkus is here with both of those stories up next. At its annual dinner after a crude performance from Michelle Wolf.
I actually really like Sarah. I think she's very resourceful. Like, she burns facts, and then she uses that ash to create a perfect smoky eye. Like, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's lies.
Sarah Sanders was so graceful. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Ron Chernow will now host the dinner next year. And Carly Shimkus with Fox News Headlines 24/7 Sirius XM 115 is here with Reaction Online. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Heather. So following last year's controversy, like you said, the White House Correspondents Association has decided to ditch the comedy portion of the night. They're going with a more serious speaker, Ron Chernow, whose work inspired the hit Broadway musical Hamilton. Chernow Kavanaugh's speech will focus on the importance of the First Amendment, but he vows to make sure the audience does not fall asleep. He says freedom of the press is always a timely subject, and this seems like the perfect moment to go back to basics. While I have never been mistaken for a stand-up comedian, I promise that my history lesson won't be dry. Meanwhile, comedian Michelle Wolf is not impressed. She tweeted, "The White House Correspondents Association are cowards. The media is complicit, and I couldn't be prouder." Still, some folks on social media think the right decision was made, like Steve, who says what Wolf did last year wasn't comedy. White House Correspondents Association made the right decision. Ed on Twitter also chiming in, saying Michelle Wolf's performance was as a comedian for the last dinner set the bar so low that it's simply a waste of time. So some people still holding a grudge over her comedy routine of last year.
If you want to call it comedy. Mean comedy. All right, let's talk about peas and carrots.
You know what, Heather? I think this may be the most hotly contested race since the midterm elections.
Yes.
The White House is asking the people to decide which turkey will get pardoned by the president later today. The contestants, one named Peas, the other named Carrots. According to the White House, Peas' favorite musician is Brad Paisley. His favorite snack is popcorn. Carrots is an Elvis fan and likes M&Ms. Naomi on Twitter saying, "Carrots wins it for me. I mean, Elvis. Come on, it's a no-brainer." Linda chiming in saying Peas is the under turkey. I choose him. So voting ends today at 11 a.m. Eastern time. You go to the White House Twitter account to vote.
I say they both get pardoned because, you know, peas and carrots go together.
They go together.
See, that's what's going to happen.
And this is reminding me of Forrest Gump.
Yeah. And they'll both what? They're both going to end up at Gobbler's Rest in Virginia Tech.
Absolutely.
So you can visit them. Chick-fil-A. This was a great story. I saw you reposted this on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, I just love the details of this one. A 92-year-old veteran was honored at a Chick-fil-A in Ohio. Meet Ernie. He comes into the same Chick-fil-A almost every day, orders a kid's meal with chicken nuggets and a root beer. But he's such a joy when he walks in that the employees wanted to give him something in return. Take a look.
What if when Ernie came in, he never had to pay for Chick-fil-A again when he came to our restaurant? And that was James' idea. He wanted to honor you, so we wanted to say, every time you come into our restaurant, you're family now, so you no longer have to pay for any of your meals. When you come in, yes.
No, he says, it's so cute. He initially refused. What a humble man. But he eventually accepted the offer. So free food for life for Ernie.
Wonderful. And Ernie, thank you for your service.
That's right. Amen to that.
Thank you, Carly.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, the time now is about 15 minutes until the top of the hour. And failing to honor a fallen hero. The first NYPD officer killed in the Iraq War denied in a street naming tribute. And now Blue Lives Matter is fighting back. Their founder is here live with how he is making sure that that fallen officer is never forgotten. News alert for you, a business alert. A string of scandals are weighing on Facebook's bottom line. Tracy Crosco from our sister network, Fox Business, here with more on the financial downturn. Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning, Heather. Yes, we saw shares of Facebook falling more than 5.7%, hitting its lowest level since February of 2017. This following last week's report in the New York Times about the troubles there and how the top management has handled them. But we've really seen the company trying to recover. So far, year to date, shares of Facebook down by more than 25%. Facebook set to close its third straight month in the red, which would mark its longest monthly losing streak on record. So we're watching that very closely. Shares right now in the pre-market already down once again.
And Mark Zuckerberg not too happy about it. And Christmas trees delivered to your door.
Yes, that's right. So you can buy all of your Christmas presents on Amazon. Now you can buy a fresh Christmas tree on Amazon. Have it delivered. They are starting their deliveries right now. You can get a Charlie Brown small Christmas tree all the way up to a 7-foot Christmas tree, pricing starting at about $20 to $110. If you're a Prime member, you can get that Christmas tree delivered to you within 3 to 7 days, just depending on where your location is. Of course, it is very convenient. It comes in a box, but it's just not the same as going out, picking it, maybe even going to a farm, cutting it down. So There you go.
I got to admit, at least it's a real one. Mine
that is
came
true.
out
At
of a
least
box.
it's real.
Mine was stored in my guest bedroom.
Yes.
But, you know, Amazon taking over the world.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, in 2005, this is a disturbing story. Listen up. Sergeant Jimmy McNaughton became the first NYPD officer killed in Iraq. And today, his family and fellow officers are petitioning the city after their request to honor his sacrifice with a street naming is rejected. Joining us live is the founder of Blue Lives Matter, the group challenging the community board's decision, Sergeant Joseph Imperatrice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So why in the world would the city or community challenge this and not allow a street to be renamed in his honor?
Starting off, this happens fairly often with city workers, police officers, firemen. I was actually at one in August for Joseph Lem, who was killed. Same thing. Detective in New York City, went overseas and was killed in action. This is not an uncommon practice for people to be honored.
Rename a street. Okay.
Correct. So Jimmy, for people that don't know, he worked in Transit District 2 in Lower Manhattan in Tribeca. So officers a few weeks ago came around and started petitioning. They raised a couple hundred signatures. I showed them around, got a couple hundred more. And they thought that they were fairly confident that it was going to go through. Well,
so he actually worked in the area where they wanted to rename the street in Tribeca.
So last weekend, Veterans Day weekend, the post comes out and they denied it. So at this time, Blue Lives, the whole point is to remember the fallen, and we said we got to step in. So co-founder Chris Brinkley, an Army veteran, ended up putting a petition up, and as of this morning, we have over 5,500 signatures. So the main thing is with these families, and they want to know that their family members are never forgotten. So when you look up at that street corner with Jimmy's name, the people that pass by on a daily basis can say, who is James McNaughton? And they can look up and see what a real American hero looks like.
Yeah, he was 27 years old. He was killed by a sniper's bullet. It happened in August of 2005. You mentioned the regularity that this happens. In 2017, 149 streets renamed. 22 of those were for police officers or veterans. Back in 2016, 37 streets renamed, 6 for police officers or veterans. Where can people go to sign this petition?
Well, we have a Facebook page, Blue Lives Matter -NYC, or our website, bluelivesmatternyc.org. Click on it, please share it, support it. This is going to be so important for when we are able to turn around the decision. The family can put a smile on their face and know that Jimmy will be honored forever.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, over 5,500 people have already signed that petition.
Correct.
And in case you need even more inspiration, the parents of Sergeant McNaughton, they will be, Michelle and Bill McNaughton, they will be live in the 7 o'clock hour of Fox and Friends. They'll be joining us to share more of his story.
So happy about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it. By the way, Fox News did reach out to the Manhattan Community Board for comment. So far, we have not heard back from them. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the work that you do. We always appreciate you joining us.
Always a pleasure.
And we will be right back. Stay with us.